I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero. Last night we had a discussion about the gates of hell and whether or not they've opened. And it was pretty much a metaphor that, of course, was brought up by Siri, which is personal assistant on the iPhone. And then I was reading about how literally the gates of hell opened up and a fiery CME came hurling towards the Earth on July 23rd, 2012. NASA knew about it, didn't say anything until they put out a report a few days ago. But just prior to this whole thing going down with the CMEs and the possible doomsday scenarios, there were a number of things that happened on the sun that, were unexplainable all the way back to 2010. I prefer to stay closer to 2012 myself because people were looking at the sun wondering if the Mayans would be correct, wondering if a big solar storm was going to hit, and then we find out one did hit, but we missed it by that much and almost ended up in the 19th century again, which is what they were saying. Now, we're always told that nothing new happens under the sun, but that's not necessarily so, because we're seeing a lot of strange things happening. On July 21st, 2014, SOHO, the Solar Observatory, was sending some very interesting images back to planet Earth. These images could not be explained, and no one could figure out just what's being seen. Scientists were saying, well, the sun is pretty quiet now, but then all of a sudden this activity started up, and I saw something that looked like a spaceship that was actually over the sun. And this has been around for some time. Whatever they are above the sun, and they write them off as some sort of a crown anomaly or a crown cell that's attached to the sun. But somebody said, well, it looks like these spheres are like ships that are docking with the sun, but there are other things that are above the sun. But this thing was huge, whatever it was. And I had someone who was a Facebook listener or Facebook follower on my show saying, you got to get a hold of James Horak, and you got to talk to him about what's going on, what's happening above the sun, what's happening above us. And I went to his website, and I was just completely blown away by everything that he has covered. James Horak first went on the Kevin Smith show a while back to talk about, I think it was February 2010, went back and had an interview with him talking about some strange things that were being seen around the sun on the SOHO stereo EUVI 195. And so I suggested, or I decided that I wanted to find out just exactly what James had to say about all this stuff. So tonight, James is on the program. We welcome him to Ground Zero. James, hi. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Mr. Lewis. How are you this evening?
I'm doing really well, and I'm glad to hear from you. You come well respected and well recommended by a lot of my listeners about what's going on around the sun. Did you happen to see the images that were shown? I think it was the 21st of this month, and then again on the 27th, we saw something that looked like a sustained solar flare just firing out of the sun, and then another what looked like what you call the EMVs. These electromagnetic vehicles coming out of the sun, or at least flying around the sun.
Yes, I have. I know about them. That type of flare is a filament flare, and it is directed and absorbed in the process of one of two things, either being utilized to make a specific metal or to farm, F-A-R-M, the energy of the sun so that Earth and nearby planets are decimated with a CME.
Mm-hmm. Do these vehicles, whatever they are, do they trigger the CMEs? I mean, I don't know if you heard, I also talked earlier in the first hour about how on July 23rd, 2012, NASA, well, actually, they made the announcement a few days ago, but NASA finally came forward and said, yes, we had a doomsday CME that we were a week out of being hit by, putting us all into the 19th century and probably killing billions of people. And I'm wondering, the whole time they were telling people who were looking at the sun in 2012, by the way, you're all weirdos, you're all pseudoscientists, and now they're coming forward and said, yeah, well, maybe there was something to all that. What do you say to that?
NASA has never been forthcoming. They are people that have highly limited job descriptions. In order to secure their position at NASA, they have to abide by that. The compartmentalization makes it difficult and almost impossible for any of the scientists there to get an exact overview. And the few that do are members of a society that is going to hide the truth at all costs.
So when you did research into these anomalies that are hovering over the sun or that are being seen near the sun, you found that this is not a new phenomenon. You saw this in 2010. You saw that NASA was publishing these, and then NASA began editing these images. How far back can we go back in the records and find these anomalies, these EMVs, these electromagnetic vehicles hovering over the sun, or at least getting power from the sun?
They've always been there. It's essential for any solar system, whether it is binary or has but one sun, to have this kind of management. If it's going to sustain life to the length of time or duration for sentience to enjoy civilizations, cities, to have anything in the way of longevity. Because if this were put to a mathematical experiment based on the cycles of the sun every 17 years, if these EMVs weren't there farming the sun, the Earth would get hit by a massive CME that would decimate one entire side of the planet.
So they're preventing the CMEs from hitting us?
Of course. They're preventing. Not only that, about a year and a half ago, on the SOHO series of images, there was a CME headed directly for Mercury, and a EMV wrapped itself around Mercury to protect it.
Now, okay, so you're saying that it was big enough to wrap itself around Mercury, this EMV?
Oh, yes.
So because I've seen, the thing that's most important that we need to know about these EMVs that James is speaking of, they're bigger than entire planets. I mean, they're millions of times bigger than the Earth, am I correct? Or thousands of times bigger than the Earth?
The diameter of Jupiter is a limit on how big that they'll ever get. They have been in the rings of Saturn, where they were first seen by Dr. Norman Berggren, who wrote a book, Ringmakers of Saturn. What he observed is that at the time that he started studying these, and he had access to images from JPL, Ames, and NASA. He was an imagist, a very renowned scientist. He noticed that the A-ring was unfinished. And before he'd finished the work on his book and got it proofread to publish it, the A-ring had been completed by these two EMVs that were at opposite termini of the unfinished ring. So the magnitude of that, he was able, by probes being able to determine certain zones between these rings and their path from one zone to the next, he was able to triangulate the size because they were exactly the length of the width of the A-ring. And what he triangulated was that they were between 5,000 and 6,000 miles long. And these aren't the largest. Of course, what's around the sun is much larger most of the time. Mm-hmm. They are task-driven, and they do what they have to do to complete their job. They are biological. They are living things. If you get to anything that size, to maintain that kind of size under stress, it almost always has to be biological.
So they most certainly are the watchers and protectors of this planet, and that they're similar to what you were saying Norman Berggren had written. There was a book in 1986 that was published called The Ringmakers of Saturn. Now, NASA had basically excoriated the book, saying that Berggren had said that there were random moons in the rings that were making the rings happen, saying that that's not even possible. But that's not what he was saying at all. He was saying something totally different, much like what you're saying tonight, which is remarkable. Now these same ships, or these huge ships, are seen around the sun, and people have a hard time explaining them. They don't know what they are. So, James, I mean, this is a pretty outrageous statement for a lot of people to swallow, but it stands to reason that we really haven't had an event that was so bad that, NASA just told us, they said, well, the 23rd we almost had one, but we didn't. They reported that the CME happened on the. They didn't hide the fact the CME happened, but what they didn't do is they didn't talk about some of the things that happened before the CME missed us, and that was the spheres that we're seeing that were attaching themselves to the sun, the triangular coronal hole, the cooling area that was in the shape of a triangle, all of those symbolic of ancient symbols that were sent down that are biblical, and then all of a sudden the CME that did not happen or that did happen that missed us. And, of course, these EMVs that are seen flying around that you talk about.
Well, it's even more extensive than that. Kevin Smith did a show on a vast portion of the sun that was open. And looking down in it, you could see rectangular structures. And the enormity of them would exceed the size of the Earth many times over. Mm-hmm. There is so much more to astrophysics than people are taught or know about, and there's so many things that are avoided, like why are planets and moons around, and what keeps a star burning for billions of years. Mm-hmm. I mean, you talk about the conservation of energy, yet they totally ignore the fact that every star is confronting that as a ridiculous proposition, much less a principle. Mm-hmm. And you have so many lies and untruths that are propagated for the convenience of the powers that be. And let me give you one of them. Before World War I, when helium was first detected burning in the sun, they didn't know what it was, but they knew that this was a strange new substance, so they considered it an element. Later on, when gasoline started being refined from oil, they discovered there was something there as a byproduct, and it didn't hang around very long, so they had to find a way of capturing it to define what it was. And when they mixed it with other gases, they found that they got the same spectrographic analysis that they were getting from gases burning on the sun. Therefore, this must be helium, which was another way of making a determination on comparisons, which is not always accurate. Mm-hmm. Then they started producing helium because they found out that it was an excellent gas for airships. They told the Germans and the rest of the world that the helium they were producing as a byproduct from refining of gasoline from oil, they told them that this was taken from a deposit in the panhandle of Texas almost exclusively, so they wouldn't look for a way of doing it themselves. And about that time is when they added helium as an element to the periodic chart of the elements, and it's not an element. But, they continued the facade, and it stays today. They never come clean about this, and this is just one thing. I can give you others.
Right.
They suppress more revelation than they reveal. And this has always been true. You have had a second technology spring up after the Civil War that was never available to the people. And when these people saw airships, people waving from the airships, they didn't know what to think. And this goes back to the 17th century.
So there's a lot of things that they keep under wraps. They want people to know about because they want to make themselves look like they're magicians or gods, so to speak, with advanced technologies.
Right.
And then,
That's right.
Then eventually they can't hide them anymore. And so same with what's going on around the sun now. We have these EMVs, and they won't explain to us that they're out there to protect us, that they're huge and they're out there and their origins. And so I'm going to ask you some more questions about it, James, about their origins and how they can stay so close to the sun without being burned up. And that's James Horak with us tonight on Ground Zero, revealing just what might be hovering out there near the sun to protect us from these horrible CMEs. NASA reported that July 23rd, 2012, we almost got hit by a massive one that would have put the whole planet in jeopardy. But they missed. James, I guess the big question is, how did they get so close to the sun? And how do they avoid all the heat? And I mean, they must have some really advanced ships to be up there doing that.
It's what they were designed to do.
They were designed to be in very hostile environments, like the ice rings of Saturn and also the sun.
They are considered by the ETs as the hand of God. It's a common name that's used. Now, not all of the ETs comply with that, but
Have you received information? Have you been in contact with any of these beings? I know that there are some people I've interviewed that have found, for example, probes that are alien probes that are out in space, and they've had contact with them. Have you had contact with some of these electromagnetic vehicles, or have you talked with anyone, or have had any visions or channeled anything of these beings?
I don't channel. I have an affinity with them.
Okay, tell me about that.
It's where I come from.
It's where you come from?
Yes.
So you're one of them?
No, I'm a liaison for them with ETs.
Okay. And so what makes them different than the regular extraterrestrials? I mean, if they're considered the hand of God, could they very well be, for example, Amun-Ra was a sun god. And he came down after there was a huge explosion from the sun. And this happened, I think, 2500, 2000 BC. There was an explosion on the surface of the sun, caused mass death on the planet, and all of a sudden, there was a god that showed up named Amun-Kef-Atef, calling himself the dragon god from the sun, and he then pretty much appeared as a deity and told them that he would help them and protect them.
Also appeared in the New World, too, as Quetzalcoatl.
Okay, so Amun-Ra and Quetzalcoatl are the same god?
Yes.
What about the gods that have sun chariots that have been mentioned in Mesopotamia and also Native American tribes?
Well, if you'd never seen an airplane and knew anything about aerodynamics, anything that moved in the sky would be called a chariot, or it'd be called a rotating wheel, or a number of things like you find in the Bible. You have to bear in mind their frame of reference at that primitive state of civilization.
Mm-hmm. So these winged discs and all of these things we hear about are these same? Well, they're probably not the same ships. I mean, there are smaller ships as well, but these ships are just there, and their job is to be sentinels for the sun, to protect the Earth from the sun's ECMEs.
Well, now, you have appendages of the EMVs which perform specific tasks, and you also have streamers, which Dr. Bergman observed, and you have craft, ET craft, that can work within the corona, but they must be protected by EMVs, so it's a matter of scheduling. Whenever these ETs want to perform certain operations and use the solar energy for a furnace, like to make a specific metal, which is very important to off-Earth civilizations. And this is a metal that allows travel in space. Otherwise, if you don't have this metal, you're not protected from the extreme motions that your ship has to undergo, or from the cosmic bombardment and radiation that's coming from stars that you're going to be exposed to. This is the reason, the primary reason, that the moon landing was hoaxed, because it couldn't be done and those men not be fried.
That was always the concern that I had for the 69 moon landing, was about the Van Allen belt and whether or not they'd be able to make it through it.
And the Van Allen belt is just the beginning. What the Van Allen belt is all that stored particle bombardment that's not coming through to Earth. It kind of catches it. It's like bugs in the fender.
What about this revelation that NASA has put forth about what are known as these exports, or these exportals, that every once in a while the magnetic field opens up a portal or a Rosen bridge, like Einstein had spoke of, that gives us a direct, I guess you could call it a conduit to the sun?
Anytime they disclose anything, it is to accomplish an agenda. The idea behind warning you about 2012 being this CME coming and all that, that is to build a notion so that they can blame any EMP that they might perform on the sun.
Okay.
Because when they start depopulation, that's one aspect they might use. Of course, they have so many methods of the kill-off that would just be one. Of course, if it turns out that people are using the internet in such a way that is threatening to their agenda, that's one way of cutting it off.
Let me talk about Comet Elenin and Comet Ison.
Yes.
Both comets were said to allegedly head towards Earth and maybe cause a cataclysm. Were these comets
were supposed to come in between the Earth and the Sun, which astrophysics would indicate might cause cataclysms, but of course they didn't. Each one did not come between Earth and the Sun.
Mm-hmm.
Although they were predicted to, they changed course. So, hence, they weren't comets, were they?
So you don't think they were comets? You would think they were?
No, they weren't comets.
They were ships?
No, they were under intelligent guidance or control.
By these same beings that are flying these ships above the sun?
Yes, yes. If you have enough energy, you can do almost anything.
I want to point out something else, and I know that many people are probably listening to this thinking that maybe James is, some people may be skeptical and think that James is making a few things up here. Let me just point out something that would back up what James is saying. If any of you have been a GroundZero fan even before we were syndicated, December 14th, 2011, there was a remarkably strange ad that was placed in a Canadian newspaper. A guy by the name of David Stein, who stated that, and David Stein allegedly was a Canadian scientist, or he was a person who observed. He was an amateur astronomer. He wrote this. He says, "My fellow human beings, it appears that a gigantic cube-shaped phenomenon that is 1,500 miles wide by 1,500 miles long and 1,500 miles high is headed toward Earth. However, it may also be vital to appreciate David Icke's insight on the need to approach such kinds of information with a desire for rational understanding rather than fear. Through rational understanding, it is much more likely for us as human beings to be able to successfully deal with such an apparent issue. Probably like you, I would like to relegate such information to the vault of conspiracy theories, which should be best heard, ignored, and forgotten. But when confronted with such an apparent scenario, being ignorant is not bliss. It is apparent that some kind of alien entity has been using the Bible's book of Revelation as a script to manifest corresponding events in human reality. This includes 9/11, which corresponds to 9/11 in the Bible, the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, Hurricane Katrina, Fukushima, and a variety of other events. World War III and the approach of the cube seem to be part of an alien checklist which we as humans cannot afford, but will also see manifested." This man was saying that there was a 1,500 miles wide, 1,500 miles long, 1,500 miles high cube headed towards planet Earth from the sun. There was actually some footage that showed a cube heading towards us. And many people said that's the city of heaven that's talked about in the Bible. What say you about that?
The outcome or destiny, the fate of this planet is in the hands of the people here. That they are not doing well with their fate is an understatement, of course. You are at a point now where if you don't get help from outside, this planet won't be survivable. You have torn it up.
Right.
And there is an EMV operation in Utah that helps hold it together because the gas extraction and now the fracking, the subsurface atomic detonations, the irresponsible slant drilling, like into the salt batholith beneath 4 states that BP put upon us. All these things are just a drop in the bucket compared to what has happened to civilizations of your species prior to now. This is the 7th lineage. There were 6 extinctions prior to that, and the evidence of that is profound.
So you were saying that there are 6 extinctions prior to the 7th one. I know that NASA or whoever, I can't remember who it was, has been saying that we are now heading towards another extinction. You were talking about a place in Utah that may be a place where these EMVs are operating out of. What place is that?
It's right above the Little Dolores River, up from where it confluences with Gunnison and goes into the Colorado.
Is that Delta?
No. There is a bridge, the Dewey Bridge. And if you go back east of the Dewey Bridge, about 4 river miles, maybe a little more, when you can come up out of the river bottom, there is a ridge valley up on the rim where if you go in there 3 nights in a row, you will, on one of those nights, between 1:30 and 6 o'clock in the morning, daylight.
You said 4 river miles.
There is a road that goes up to the rim and goes through a park that you can go back towards Grand Junction. It's about 40 miles, but it takes about 6 hours to do because it's cheap trails. That's how I usually go in, because if I come in from the Dewey Bridge, a lot of times the river may be up and there's a river crossing in order to get to the other side, and that may be too high. One time when I was coming in, it was night. And when I'd come out, the river was down, but there had been rain up in Telluride, and so that water had raised the river. You can see at night these UFOs are driving machines with this motion.
Right.
And what they do is they replace the movements all over the world with what's going on down underneath. You have a number of engines in the Earth, and then you have machines on the moon which keep the moon in place, because the moon has inconstant mass. It's not the right proportion to Earth. It wants to go in or come out.
Right.
These adjustments keep it in place.
All right. We're going to take a break here, James, and we'll be right back with you here on Ground Zero. James Horak with us on Ground Zero. Taking your phone calls coming up. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Keep it here. All of the record is there if you look at all these places. In fact, we were posting a lot of stuff on the Facebook page. We also have some of the old evidence of these things, plus the what I call the tetragrammatron triangular hole. It's a coronal hole that was seen. And for those of you that don't know, is that it's a triangular hole that was dark, and it created this image of a triangle in the middle of the sun. And this was prior to what NASA was saying about a CME that was supposed to hit the planet on July 23rd, 2012. Now, this is a remarkable shot of this triangle because anciently this was a symbol of the unnamed God. And, you know, if you think that what my guest James Horak is saying is strange, then how is it are we seeing all of these signs in heaven unless somebody's trying to tell us something? And when you're looking at the YHWH, or the tetragrammaton, and the symbolism there, and how it's represented at churches, and how we've talked about the triune, trident, triquetra, all these things, saying that whenever these symbols are shown, they are a representation of what's to happen before upheaval. And we see these same images showing long before, and we saw what they call these... I don't know what they call them. They call them coronal prominence cavities, or polar crown cavities. This was in March of 2012. That were hovering around the sun. Now, these coronal prominence cavities, or polar crown cavities, as scientists called them, look like round ships that are basically docking on the sun, and they're pulling energy out of the sun. And so I had a listener tell me, you need to talk to James Horak about this because he knows what he's talking about. So we got him on the program to talk about it, and here you are on the show. You know about that triangle that showed 2012. It was March of 2012. It was called the coronal. It was a black triangular coronal hole, and it represents the unnamed God. It represents the tetragrammatron, and it sent a signal that the wrath of God was about to come down on Earth. That's what anciently it would say to people who were ancients. What do you say about that?
Well, since the current cosmology here is based on mythology,
yeah,
it depends upon how you perceive things, what your frame of reference is. But of course, about after I had done a couple of shows with Kevin Smith, I predicted that there would appear a serpent in the sun, which would be actually a string of EMVs. And there they were. They're demonstrating for you that, yes, hello, we're here. That's on our website that TORS has provided. You can see it plainly. One of the things I'd like to say is the only reason that you're getting these images, you're getting anywhere near the truth, is that a number of other space agencies were getting the raw feed from the SOHO satellite, so it was hard to hide the truth.
Right.
Now, of course, they're clamping down, but we even went through a period of a number of months where you could see the solar anvil. But the solar anvil is another thing entirely, and it is very prominent in the images that we were being allowed to see at the time. And Kevin Smith did a show on that and what it was.
What about the images on the 21st? Now, that thing that's above the sun does not look like it belongs there. It looks like a huge spaceship that's above the sun. That image on the 21st, this is the image that we've been showing all of the sun's images that have been provided that we're talking about tonight that make people pause and go, wow, what are these things that are hovering around the sun? Why are they being picked up by SOHO? And why isn't NASA? I mean, I'm sure NASA has some sort of explanation, but they don't get to it. And they leave it to the amateur astronomers to come up with ideas as to what they may be. As I said, the spheres that we're seeing in March of 2012 hovering around the sun using filaments as a way to fuel themselves. That, of course, many people debunked and said, oh, those aren't spaceships, yet they look like spaceships. They say, oh, these are polar crown cavities. They're basically, they're a membrane that form a sphere, and they're basically hovering like a little sperm over the sun. And I'm going, when the hell? They didn't teach me that in science class.
Well, if you'll think about it, the explanations that these debunkers get are far more fantastic than the truth. Once you understand that nothing is accidental, that there's design in everything, every astral body of any size that is performing within a solar system is designed to be there. Uh-huh. The moons, the planets all have substructure, and so do stars. You see, once you realize that over a span of time, sentience is capable of the most fantastic things that are unimaginable here. The Greeks were great myth makers, but the truth is so much more fantastic than they could ever imagine. And I'm sorry to say that most astrophysics, as is taught on this planet, is compared to reality more like Greek myth-making than it is observation.
Well, I'd always thought to myself that a lot of what NASA says is great myth-making, and now looking back at this announcement, yeah, they said the CME had come out of the sun, but they never once told us that CME was going to kill us all, and that it could have killed us all, or it could have killed most of us.
One of the things that's interesting is their imprecision. They use the terms solar flare and coronal mass ejection interchangeably, and there is a distinct difference. And unless you understand these things, you're left in a confusion. Uh-huh. A solar flare returns its mass to the sun because of the sun's gravity. A CME goes so far out and with so much force that it sends plasma traveling beyond the return to the sun. That's the difference between a coronal mass ejection and a solar flare. And the solar storms, which build up, there is a counter buildup on the other side, the exact opposing side of the sun. So that energy can be farmed or dispersed on the other side of the sun out of sight.
Right.
So the activity is not always obvious. Before 2000, when a very prominent and yet undiscovered comet came through, you probably remember it. Mm-hmm. It was double nucleated. And when it came through the solar system the second time, I was in contact with a group of amateur astronomers which call themselves the Millennium Group. Now, it has nothing to do with the television series. I told them when it goes, it'll come by Saturn, and it'll go out past the sun. Watch it as it nears the sun, and you will see these large bodies. And not only did they discover the EMVs that were transporting with the comet, but they noticed, they kept their eye on them. They have access, this particular group can rent observatory telescopes when the barrel of the telescope is in the quadrant they want.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did, and they actually could see these EMVs reacting with the solar storms on the sun. And this is before 2000. That they didn't have enough pull to get that out is sad, but that's the case. I was in touch with Dr. Berggren after I read his book and was so impressed. I called him, and we talked, and we started having something of a relationship, discussion or whatever, until I told him, I said, the EMVs are going to be found in the sun. And he says, how do you know that? And I told him, well, I just did. And he kept hounding me and hounding me and hounding me. And so finally I said, because I'm not from here. And when I said that ended my relationship with Dr. Berggren, because he is a prominent scientist, very pragmatic, and I knew it would. But I wasn't going to lie to the man, and I wasn't going to, discredit myself with subterfuge. So
all of his work backed up your claims. All of your claims backed up his work as well. And he couldn't get beyond the fact that you were one of them. That you said you were one of them and that you had special knowledge.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I was put in a situation that I didn't want to be in, but I knew that it would be inevitable. He was worried about the magnitude of the EMVs, and I wanted to tell him that they were not threatening.
Well, I'm going to take a break right now, and we'll be back with more. Keep it here on Ground Zero. It gets fascinating, more fascinating as we go on with this conversation tonight. We'll be back with more. Keep it here. Don't go away. Okay, so this was issued today. It's a breaking news story, actually, because the mainstream has not attached this, but it is a developing story about what we're talking about tonight. Paul Singer, he's a billionaire hedge fund manager. Paul Singer issued an unusual warning for investors today, calling the threat of a widespread blackout from an electromagnetic surge the most significant danger in the world today. Called an electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, the events could occur naturally from solar storms or artificially from high-altitude explosions of nuclear weapons. Quote, while these pages are typically chock full of scary or depressing scenarios, there is one risk that is head and shoulders above all the rest in terms of the scope of potential damage, adjusted for the likelihood of occurrence, Singer wrote to his clients of his $24.8 billion Elliott Management Company. He said in his standard investment update letter, even horrendous nuclear war, except in its extreme form, can be a relatively localized issue, and the threat from asteroids can possibly be mitigated, he says. However, a natural EMP event today would cause a massive disruption to the electric grid, possibly shutting it down entirely for months or longer, with unimaginable consequences, Singer wrote. Only 2 years ago, the sun let loose with a Carrington magnitude burst, but the position of the Earth at the time prevented the burst from hitting it. The chances of additional events of such magnitude may be far greater than most people think. So, what NASA issued has now got Paul Singer telling his investors that one of the worst things that can happen to us is an electromagnetic surge or an EMP from a CME. So it's getting a lot of people buzzing about this very thing. NASA delaying their report on what happened, and then, of course, you have been monitoring the activity around the sun and all of the things that we've been seeing around the sun that NASA has denied or otherwise have edited, right?
There will be no EMP caused by solar activity. There was a series of significant CMEs that took out a number of the military satellite array.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing, by the way.
In your opinion, right?
Well, you tell me what good that the military satellite array does for anybody but the military.
Well, if you believe the military is here to protect us, then they can protect us from any oncoming threats, right?
No, not from the sun.
Well, no, not from the sun. I mean, heck, they don't even monitor the asteroids, nor do they monitor these rogue rocks that are coming our way. Just look at what happened in Chelyabinsk back when on Valentine's Day, 2013.
This military satellite array is used for surveillance and for weaponizing space, and those are not good things. In fact, they create an illusion that there is an off-world escape for the elite in the advent of programs of depopulation.
So you're talking about what they call the what do they call that? Not the away team. They call it the civilization that will live off planet. The away civilization, or a lot of people are talking about this, that they're actually plotting a civilization escape because of all the things going on with the sun and possible asteroids and things of that nature.
Well, without the metal, they can't do that.
Well, the breakaway, they call it the breakaway civilization. And apparently China, and this was just issued today, 90% of the United States does not know that China has a space station, and that now it's being observed that this space station may be used for military purposes, and that it may be used for space war.
Well, I don't see that as a potential refuge for the elite, Chinese or otherwise, any more than Bigelow's hotel, and all these are forces as far as an escape for any contingent of humanity. What
about Mars? What about the moon? I mean, are there bases up there that we don't know about?
There were, but they've been run off. Humans have been run off both Mars. Earth-based humans have been run off both Mars and the moon.
But we've had programs up there, in your opinion. I mean, even though you believe...
You didn't get there on a rocket.
Okay. How did we get there?
EB craft.
The same craft that you're talking about right now?
No, EB.
Okay, what's that?
Extra biological entities, the Greys.
Mm-hmm. So they were the ones that took... That's what Captain K said. We interviewed a guy named Captain K who said that they were taken up aboard a craft that seated a number of people, and it wasn't a rocket when they were...
So did Niara Isley.
Who?
Niara Isley.
Okay.
Are you familiar with her?
No, I'm not. She also was involved with the Mars program?
No. She was working as a radar operator at the Air Force Base in Las Vegas, and so they decided they would use her and ask her if she wanted to go to Groom Lake for a tour. They took her to the moon, and it was aboard an EB craft with a Gray navigating it, because no human can navigate an EB craft.
I think I heard about that story. There are a number of MILAB stories that goes with what I've read in the past. James Horak is my guest tonight on Ground Zero. We'll be back. Tonight, James Horak's my guest. I'm talking about those protectors of the sun, the hand of God, whatever you want to call them. They're out there, and they're watching us. And according to James, they're protecting us. Why? Because James says he's one of them, and that his research is backed up by what he sees and what NASA has been showing. And there's SOHO, there's stereo, whatever it is you look at, you see these things that are hovering around the sun, and there's no explanation for them. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a few phone calls. A lot of people wanting to ask you some questions. Some people not too convinced, but we'll go to the calls anyway. Let's go to Randy in Tennessee. You're on Ground Zero.
Yeah, how y'all doing? Long-time listener, first-time caller here. I just would like to know what the evidence is. I was looking here on Google, and I didn't see anything, hardly anything at all about the EMVs or any of what his research he was saying about.
So you didn't see anything on the pictures we told you to look at?
Very little.
Okay, look at July 21st, 2014. There's not very little there to be seen. In fact, I've got it posted all over my website. It's being shown on Tesla Wolf Media right now. The anomaly that's above the sun, that's huge. Also, we can look back at March of 2012, the huge spheres that were actually attached to the sun that looked like they were fueling up from the sun. There's also another attachment that was on the 27th of July that I have posted also on my website that shows an anomaly leaving the sun and then a huge sustained flare going off from the sun after it leaves, going the other direction.
Right. I've seen those, but I was mostly concerned with the fact that he says that he is like you said, he is one of them. What evidence does he have of such things besides than just his word for it, if I may ask?
Can you answer that, James?
I would suggest if you had access to Kenneth Smith's archives, you would pretty well lay out my history and the experiences that I've had from my childhood on. I've had a number of incidents that are documented, namely one when I was in the U.S. Navy. And the things that I can offer is information. I can predict certain things with accuracy. And, what I hold to is not that you accept anything I say, but I want to give you a way of looking at things. And if I strike a chord with you, then good. If I don't, well, I tried. I'm not here for myself.
Right. I'm not, trying to be negative about it. I just would like...
Oh, I know you're not, and I respect your inquiry and don't blame you at all for being skeptical. I welcome healthy skeptics.
Okay, I will most certainly be looking these things up. I appreciate that.
Let me give you my blog. It's www.emvsinfo.blogspot.com.
All right.
You got that?
Yes, I do. I will be looking those up.
If you're there, you'll find places where you can, under all the videos, where you can ask questions and you can introduce yourself, ask anything you wish. I will be happy to answer. I keep abreast. I don't ignore people that are asking questions. So make yourself at home. There's a lot there. And convince yourself one way or the other.
Well, Randy, I appreciate your skepticism. I thank you for calling in tonight.
Thank you, Clyde.
Take care. Bye-bye. Okay,
Thank you, Randy.
Let's go to Leanne in Maine, another skeptic. WVOM, you're on Ground Zero.
Hello, Clyde. You remain in my prayer pillow.
Okay. Go ahead.
I want to know, what in the world do we trust now? I don't think the government's going to tell us anything they can't control. It's just going to happen. But as to the moon landing, I know that one of our astronauts got into a fist fight because somebody told him he hadn't gone to the moon. And how does this man explain moon dust and moon rocks?
Well,
I saw with my parents the moon landing in '69.
I don't believe we landed on the moon in '69 either, Leanne. I have never believed it.
Well, what is it going to profit anyone?
The military-industrial complex. That's what it profited. We were at a major war, and we needed something to bring the planet together, and it was the moon landing. Why is it that something so remarkable as the moon landing in '69 only gets a small portion of history? We don't have ticker tape parades or fireworks or anything to celebrate this major accomplishment that was made by three men. And in my opinion, I mean, Neil Armstrong basically hid from the public eye, didn't want to do any interviews with anyone. Buzz Aldrin's now coming forward and saying all kinds of crazy things about monoliths on Mars, and he's saying that that UFOs followed them to the moonshot. You sit here and you say to yourself, okay, you're dealing with something that in '69 was outrageous to begin with. Even Wernher von Braun said that it was impossible to land on the moon in '69. And everybody forgets
how do we
that.
Explain the moon rocks and the moon dust. And
because they finally did go. They finally did go to the moon. They finally figured it out and they went. We only been to the moon like maybe 3 times. That's how I see it. It's only been like 3 or 4 times. I mean, I've interviewed Chuck Cernan, and I think Cernan went to the moon. I just have a hard time thinking that Armstrong and Buzz and I have a hard time with that, and it's because of the fact that I just think it was too soon. And they had the best German scientists there to make it all look real, and they faked most of it.
I think this whole business has turned into a giant game of who do you trust, and we're the losers.
Well, always has been.
Yeah, always has been. I mean, NASA couldn't do it in '69, but they delayed it, and they finally figured out how to do it. And when they did it, by then people were bored with it, and it's well-known history that when we finally accomplished some remarkable feats on the moon where it was beyond the idea of just high-fiving and putting a flag up. People would rather know whether or not Lucille Ball had a boy or a girl on her television show. They didn't care about the moon landing.
Oh, boring. I'm more bored with Lucille Ball.
Well, I mean, you go back in history, and that's what you see. I mean, there's got to be a reason why, they canceled Star Trek in '68. They didn't want you to watch fake space exploration while they were doing space exploration on national news.
What's interesting about Star Trek is it never resolved the UFO issue, did it?
No, never did. It never will.
Oh, my gosh.
It never will. No, that's just, look, that's just been my thing. 69 didn't land on the moon. I've always felt that way because I just don't think it happened. I think it eventually happened. I'm not going to, deny people their moon dust. I mean, Cernan told me what it tasted like, like gunpowder. He said he basically had it on his boots. He smelled it. He ate it. I'm not going to deny that. I don't believe, though, in being a crusader against the 69 moon landing like Bart Sibrel does, or Keating. Was that his name? Not Keating. I forgot his name, the old man that used to do it. I just don't see myself as that type of person, but, I have my doubts about the 69 moon landing, and I've talked about it before. It's gotten me in a lot of hot water, but, when you look back at it, it's kind of a crazy thing, and it's a little too remarkable for the times.
The lack of success in retrospect since should demonstrate to you to be very suspicious that it could have been done in '69.
Right. I mean, if it's so wonderful, why haven't we gone back? And why didn't the Russians ever go?
That's right.
Why didn't the Russians ever go? Why didn't they? I mean, I would have been number 2 if I didn't make it. They were almost ready to go. And then they wake up one morning and they find out we got man on the moon. And they go, forget it. We're not going to the moon.
I begin to wonder if it's money and who's controlling the money.
Well, we'll have to see. They canceled the Orion project, Constellation project. We're all ready to go to the moon in 2025,
and had it paid for.
Yeah, we had it all paid for. And what happened? Barack Obama steps in and says, we're not going to the moon. What?
And you're surprised about that?
Oh, well, of course I am, because I was thinking now we can prove once and for all if Clyde Lewis is a fraud. They can't prove it anymore. I'm not a fraud. I don't think we landed on the moon in 69. I think that even if we did make it...
We won't be living in the United States anymore, for gosh sakes. Of course he doesn't want us to go to the moon either.
I don't know.
You've got to keep your sense of humor about this, Clyde. Honest to Godfrey Peter.
I do. Of course I do. A lot of people don't think I do, but I keep my sense of humor about this. You have to, or otherwise you're going to go absolutely bat crazy. It's going to drive you nuts.
I know. You've got a plaster smile on your face. You've got to keep it there, even if you feel sick.
Oh, yeah. You know all about that tonight. I've been holding on. Believe me. I've been doing this 2 nights, and I don't know if I can handle another hour, so I'm going to try and sweat through it, but I don't think I can make it. So, Leanne, yes, thank you for keeping me in your prayers.
Well, I'll tell you a deep, dark secret. I couldn't take last night's program after a point. I really couldn't. My mind just snapped right off. I said, Clyde, I love you, but I'm out of here.
Yeah, it's pretty scary, isn't it, when you think about it, isn't it?
It freaked me pretty badly.
Well, yeah, it tweaked me, too. I mean, when you think about the metaphor of the gates of hell opening up, when you go back to March of 2012 and look up the triangular coronal hole and tell me that isn't a symbol of the Tetragrammatron, which is the unnamed God, and God saying, look out, I'm about to strike. That's what it meant to the ancients. And then on the 23rd of July, God strikes, and then if you believe James, the hand of God steps in and basically detours a CME. Something's going down. Okay, so...
Okay, so the gates of hell opened up on my birthday, the 27th.
Well, have a hell of a birthday then. That's all I have to say. Leanne,
I had a heaven of a one.
Or have a heaven of a one, depending on how you look at it. Leanne, thank you for the call.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Tonight, we're very pleased to have with us James Horak, who, of course, has been talking to us about protectors that have hovered around the sun for some time. We have seen these ships, these protectors, hovering around the sun because we see them show up, just unexpectedly, on a lot of the Soho images, a lot of the stereo images. And we always get the same old from NASA saying, oh, it's just an anomaly. It's just something we can't explain. Well, James is doing a good job of explaining it, and he even says that he knows why they're there because he is one of them, or he's had contact with them, the ones that are protecting the planet. Back with more Ground Zero. Don't go away. James Horak's my guest tonight on Ground Zero. We're going to go to some quick calls. So let's get him going here. Let's go to Daniel in Virginia. Hi, Daniel. You're on Ground Zero.
guys doing tonight? I want to appreciate the call. Let me call in. I'm a long-time listener, and I have a quick question for both of you. My question is, how do we know that the extraterrestrials are actually protecting the sun for our benefit and not for their own benefits, for meaning like their own technologies on Earth, their own interests on Earth? Because from what our histories have shown us through myth and legend have been that they've been here for thousands of years doing their own, how do we say, like research and their own agendas here on Earth, and basically using the humans as pawns for their own purposes.
Yeah, okay, let's go to that question. We got the question, Daniel. Let's go and ask James. James, what they're protecting us for who's good? Their good or our good?
You have to distinguish between ETs and EBs. EBs were made for deep space exploration. They're nothing more than sewn together chunks of meat with a computer terminal. They're not sentient. And they are and have been useful to covert military black ops that have been using them to stage these abductions and a number of other things. The use of their vehicles is done, but the vehicles, the EBs are not capable of making the metal. They're using vehicles that are reconstructed from damaged vehicles, and they replicate themselves. But as far as ET is concerned, ET is civilized. One of the things that is true of sentient life, if they get past star travel, they've made it. And aggression and aberrancy is out of the question. They can't survive. Look what we're doing here. What you see here is the wrong directions that have been taken with technology, and we're self-destructing. If you have the ability to hold in your hand a device that can destroy a planet, don't you you think you had better be civilized? You better have come away from this hostility, from this aggression, or you couldn't survive. You can't. I call it getting over the hump. Well, and you're nowhere near doing that.
It's beyond Fermi's paradox, I'll tell you that much, because we were talking about Fermi's paradox a while back, about civilizations that may wipe themselves out once they get technologies that are super technologies, and there are other civilizations that are out there that are just begging us to pay attention to them, and we don't pay attention to them at all.
Well, you have complications in your evolution. Number one is you are unique in having a split consciousness, subconscious and a conscious mind.
What is remarkable about your story, James, is that it kind of reminds me of Rendezvous with Rama, that story that Arthur C. Clarke wrote about. Although the aliens that wanted to refuel at that block on the sun didn't care about us at all. That's the difference. They didn't care about anything. All they cared about is getting their work done, getting out of there. And we as humans were arrogant and wanted them to know who we are. And when they didn't acknowledge us, we wanted to kill them. So it's an interesting, diametrically opposed story, but it's certainly something.
With TTs, it isn't indifference. It's just a matter of understanding.
Right.
You are on your own timetable.
Yeah.
And you can't be saved from yourself. And if you survive, wonderful. The universe appreciates new things. We would love to see the split consciousness survive.
Well, thank you, James. We're out of time right now, and we thank you for being on the program tonight. James Horak, you can go to his website. We'll have it listed on the Facebook page coming up on Ground Zero.
FM News 101 KXL.